For each of my Way Back When books, I went through the Santa Barbara newspapers day by day, looking for interesting and quirky news from 100 years ago. The local papers that we had here in 1918 were the Morning Press, the Daily News and Independent, and both in Santa Barbara, and the Carpinteria Valley News. The first war-related news in the local papers appeared in April 1914, but this was not about news about the war in Europe, which had not started yet. People here were really concerned about the revolution in Mexico. Troop trains passed through Santa Barbara on their way to Mexico. Our local newspapers carried headlines such as, "More soldiers pass through on way to border." When two warships cruised down the channel at top speed, scores of enthusiastic Santa Barbarans flocked to the wharf, and the air echoed with cheers as some of the throngs were carried away with patriotism. Even Irving Berlin jumped on the bandwagon and wrote a song called "They're on Their Way to Mexico." One of the local movie theaters here advertised Mexican war pictures, actual photographs of the present war, the pictures taken on the battle line, biggest and best pictures ever shown of the great Mexican rebellion. In June 1914, the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was on the front page of the newspapers here, but clearly the implications of the event, which soon led to World War I, were not clear to citizens here, and we were not alone in that respect. A senior British lawyer quoted in the article said that the chances of peace in Europe were actually improved with the assassination, since the Archduke's heir apparent leaned more toward peace than his dad, who was killed. In August 1914, there was an article in the paper about a Santa Barbara woman who was in Paris when the war began. She told the paper, "Friday morning we were tourists. Friday night we were refugees. Today I am not quite sure what to call ourselves." She and her traveling companions were forced to leave their luggage in Paris and make a mad dash for one of the last boats crossing the Channel to England. But the local paper did not take the conflict seriously. "Oh, cheer up." This was the headline of an editorial about the beginning of World War I in a local paper. "After a good scrap or two," the editorial continued, "the Europeans will come to their senses. Why, bless you, they can't keep it up so long." But as the months ticked by, the realization began to sink in. People started to report ships in the Channel that they thought were German warships. Folks here started holding benefits for people in Europe. In 1915, there seemed to be few signs of the war in day-to-day life in Santa Barbara, but it was there in the background. Moving on to 1916, there was a proposal to establish a naval academy in Hope Ranch. But that did not happen because people were afraid that if we entered the war, the Naval Academy would make us a target. However, headlines here showed that we were still concerned about Mexico. A headline in all caps read, "Border situation is acute. War threat of Mexico stirs U.S. border forces." Another article wrote, "Troops stop on way to border. 3 trainloads of troops from San Francisco, bound for the Mexican border, passed through the city on their way to battle." In November 1916, the first U.S. Army recruiting office opened on State Street. And over at Santa Barbara High School, male students started drilling in uniform with rifles. And a naval training ship anchored here for a 4-day stay. By 1917, people were starting to get nervous. In February, a train whistle that malfunctioned and blew for 30 minutes caused a panic here. In March, the local paper reported about a telegram that the Germans had sent to Mexico, suggesting that if Mexico attacked the US, Germany would support them and help them to regain the territory that they had lost in the Mexican-American War. And that was the last straw. On April 6, 1917, the US Congress declared war with Germany. In June, draft-age men had to register for the draft. In September, the first group of men, whose numbers had been picked in the draft lottery, left for training camp, and more left in the remaining months of 1917 and 1918. Which brings us to our countdown to armistice. What was life like here in Santa Barbara from November 1 to November 11 in 1918? And by the way, the telegrams that I will be reading about the deaths of soldiers are real. Friday, November 1. The headline in the local paper today was, "Revolution in Austria. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicates Hun throne," in letters almost 2 inches high, in an article that told how the people and troops of Austria revolted and declared a republic. There were 10 articles today about the Spanish flu epidemic. One of them was the notice about a funeral for an 18-year-old Santa Barbara man who had died of the flu in an army training camp in Spokane, Washington. The article mentioned that he had left on the train to go to the camp with 19 other draftees only 2 weeks earlier. 2 other young men from that same group were listed as dangerously ill. The city health officer emphasized that everyone in Santa Barbara who had flu symptoms was required to wear a gauze mask, and anyone who was taking care of a flu patient was also required to wear a mask. So far, there were 456 cases of flu in Santa Barbara. This put a strain on the facilities at Cottage Hospital, so an emergency hospital was established in a vacant school. There were 23 new cases reported yesterday. An article about how to treat the flu noted that no disease develops so quickly or spreads so rapidly. The first symptom is usually a sharp rise in temperature to 103 or 104 degrees. Many people stayed home because they were sick or to avoid contact with people who were sick. There were no trick-or-treaters on Halloween. Schools and theaters were closed. There was no radio or TV in those days. So the local record store allowed people to telephone and order a record to be delivered to their home on approval and have it picked up again the next morning. There were 3 telegrams delivered to Santa Barbara families today. Telegram for Mr. and Mrs. Henry Faciolo. We deeply regret to inform you that your son William died from the influenza at the training camp in Spokane, Washington. Telegram for Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Hodgkins. We deeply regret to inform you that your son Ernest died from his wounds in action in France. Telegram for Mr. and Mrs. Charles Hall. We deeply regret to inform you that your son John died from his wounds in action in France. Saturday, November 2nd. Again, there were 2-inch headlines in local papers today. Revolt covers Germany. In other news, there was a notice to voters to approve the measure to prohibit alcohol in California. Also, the Red Cross was asking people to bring papers, magazines, bottles, tinfoil, clothing, rags, old tires, and old rubber to their headquarters. Because churches were closed, the newspaper was printing sermons from local clergy who tried to give some hope to people. One minister wrote, "Fellow citizens, out of the turmoil and the strife of world war, out of the baptism of blood and tears of the last 4 years, let us with resolute hearts face the new day of world peace." The flu situation here was worsening. There were 32 new cases yesterday, and today, as of 2 p.m., there were 24 new cases. The Board of Health and local doctors would be meeting this evening to discuss the situation. The local Red Cross was almost out of masks. People were advised to make their own. Telegram for Mr. and Mrs. Christensen of Carpinteria. We deeply regret to inform you that your son Dennison died from the influenza at the training camp in Spokane, Washington. Sunday, November 3rd. The front page headlines today were, "Yankees at Hun's last stronghold." In other news, it was reported that Santa Barbara was considering developing a place for airplanes to land. Alan Lockheed told the local paper, "After the war, aeroplanes are going to be as numerous as grasshoppers. Hundreds will be seen hovering in the air on mail routes and as passengers and other carriers." At the meeting of the doctors and Board of Health last night, it was reported that there had been 37 new cases of the flu yesterday. Doctors advised that all sick persons wear masks to avoid spreading germs. They said that there was no need for healthy people to wear masks. No telegrams were received today, but Mr. James Martin got a letter from his son who was in the army in France. His son was wounded and in a French hospital. Joseph Carr, a young man who had been the managing editor of the local paper, had volunteered to serve with the Grizzlies, a group of Army volunteers from California. Today, the paper received a letter from his father in New York stating that his son had been killed in action in France. Monday, November 4. Today, the Board of Health announced that anyone who wished to ride on the streetcar must wear a mask. 16 new flu cases were reported yesterday and early today as of press time. It was announced that next week, on November 11, 297 young men from Santa Barbara County would leave on a train to go to their training camp. The men would each receive sweaters or scarves. One telegram arrived today. Telegram for Mrs. Lola Ordaz. We deeply regret to inform you that your son William died from his wounds in action in France. Tuesday, November 5. Another day of 2-inch headlines. These read, "Germany must give up. Supreme War Council demands unconditional surrender." The Santa Barbara County Food Commissioner announces that the county has sent several train cars full of fruit pits and walnut shells to be used in making carbon for gas masks in the war. As of press time today, 51 new cases of flu have been reported. 32 were reported yesterday. So far, more than 600 people here have been hit by the flu. One flu death was announced in the paper, 19-year-old Consuelo Romero. The paper wrote, "He was taken down suddenly, having been around as usual as late as Friday night." Most of the flu deaths were in people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. News was received today that Adam Garcia and Thomas Graham were victims of a gas attack in France. Both were recovering in hospitals there. Wednesday, November 6. The headline today read, Hun chiefs must beg peace on battlefield. Allies will supply food for defeated and hungry. Airplanes were still on people's minds here. An editorial today predicted that within 5 years, airmail will take place of mail delivered by train, and possibly put the telegraph company out of business. The flu situation here was still getting worse. 67 new cases were reported yesterday. Local doctors advised putting a few drops of kerosene or wintergreen oil on flu masks to help avoid the flu. The papers reported the death of a 43-year-old man from the flu. 2 telegrams were received today. Telegram for Mrs. Emma Schwenk. We deeply regret to inform you that your son Lester died from his wounds in action in France. Telegram for Mr. and Mrs. S. Rutherford. We deeply regret to inform you that your son Laurie died from his wounds in action in France. Thursday, November 7. The 2-inch headline today was, Hun stronghold burns. But the big news of the day was what we now call the False Armistice. Someone in Europe sent a message back to the US that Germany had signed the peace agreement, but it was sent in error and was quickly denied 2 hours later by the US State Department. Here in Santa Barbara, the local telephone office reported that there were more than 47,000 calls in a 1-hour period on this day. The local health department announced that 72 new flu cases were recorded yesterday. The Visiting Nurse Association had nurses who cared for sick people in their homes. One paper commented, whole families are stricken at once, with no one to do the smallest service for them. Little children calling mama, wandering about uncared for, while mama and papa are abed, tossing with fever. The City Council discussed creating a municipal monument in honor of the Santa Barbara men who served in the war, but this was not done. It was announced today that George Ahern, one of the Flying A movie studio's actors who was drafted from Santa Barbara, was killed in action in France. Friday, November 8. Today's headline, whole German Navy in revolt. The flu dominated the local news today. One paper reported, grip victims decrease in number. The other paper stated, flu epidemic unabated. One paper said that there were 16 new flu cases yesterday. The other paper said 22. It was announced that there was a vaccine for the flu, but opinions varied as to whether or not it was effective. You had to receive 3 injections 2 days apart. There were no quarantine signs in Santa Barbara posted at homes where there were flu cases, so people making deliveries had no way of knowing where the flu germs were lurking. Many cities used such signs. The editorial in a local paper urged the posting of these signs. Saturday, November 9. Today's 2-inch headline, Vote German Republic. Emperor defies ultimatum demanding abdication and crown prince's renunciation. 32 new flu cases were reported as of 2 p.m. today. Yesterday, a total of 41 were reported. That brought the number up for the week to 221. Only 6 people showed up for the vaccine yesterday. The paper further announced that people had to wear approved style flu masks in order to ride in the streetcars. Just a scarf was not enough. With the talk of armistice in the papers, the mayor and the city council were looking forward to attracting tourists here. The paper wrote, "The big move has been made to develop Santa Barbara as a summer resort, as well as a place attractive to winter tourists." Telegram for Mrs. Mary Compton of Montecito. "We deeply regret to inform you that your son William died from his wounds in action in France." Sunday, November 10. Today's headline: "Revolt grows hourly despite Kaiser's reported abdication." The only flu news today was a strange article that someone in Santa Barbara noticed that cats are sneezing and says they have the flu as well. From Sacramento comes news that among the first women elected to serve in the California legislature was a woman who had grown up here and graduated from Santa Barbara High School. Her name was Grace Green Doris. No relation. Just a moment, please. The final figures were in, and it was announced that there were more than 2,800 automobiles registered in the city of Santa Barbara. And so ended the last 10 days of the war to end all wars. Monday, November 11. It happened here at 1 a.m. in the morning. I'll let the headlines in the papers here speak for themselves. "Joy unceasing, loosened in Santa Barbara on clanging of many bells. Peace, guns roar, hushed on Western Front, Germany surrenders. War ends with object of victors attained, declares President." And the last one, "President reads truce terms to Congress. Conditions strip Germany of all war-making powers." The paper reported that the bells at the mission rang and rang and rang. Some factory whistles blew as well. At 3 a.m., a procession of 500 automobiles was rushing up and down State Street from the mountains to the sea. At 5 a.m., 2,000 people were singing "Over There" and the Star-Spangled Banner on street corners here. A band was leading them, and the city was filled with noises of all varieties. The flu hung around for several more months, and the dreaded telegrams kept coming about soldiers who had died before the armistice, but at least the war was over. I have included a special memorial page at the end of my 1918 book with the names of the nearly 70 young men from Santa Barbara County who were killed in the war. And on the front cover of the book is a picture of women from the Santa Barbara Red Cross at the train station here, welcoming the soldiers back from the war.